A man approached their car with what appeared to be a pillowcase over his head with...
The dog came back, but she didn't.
And working for the military, so why wasn't anyone other than her family desperately searching for answers?
If you're easily scared, turn off this video now. In 1946, the Texarkana region was terrorized by someone that the press named at the time the Phantom Slayer. The first attack was on an unsuspecting young couple parked in a secluded lane. A man approached their car with what appeared to be a pillowcase over his head with holes cut out for eyes. The pair was suddenly attacked by the man. Although they did survive this attack, they were unable to identify the man because of what he was wearing on his head and also being blinded by his torch. In a 10-week period, the attacker had a total of 8 victims. Unfortunately, 5 of these victims passed away. Locals were so terrified of these attacks that shops were actually selling out of weapons and people were barricading themselves into their homes. The only official suspect in this case was Yul Swinney. He was suspected due to circumstantial evidence. They didn't have any DNA back in these days. He was never actually convicted of this crime due to a lack of evidence and due to a lack of people wanting to testify against him. In 1976, a film was released called The Town That Dreaded Sundown, and it was based around these true events.
Do you guys remember the disturbing case of Mina and Sarah Saeed? On January 1st, 2008, Yasser Saeed took his 2 daughters' lives, Amina and Sarah, because he found out that they had boyfriends. Yasser and Patricia had 3 children, Amina, Sarah, and their son, but all the women in the family feared that Yasser would take their lives if they didn't listen to him. He was abusive and controlling, and according to his cultural beliefs, his daughters were not allowed to date anyone, and he had actually tried to sell them to an arranged marriage multiple times. At 18 years old, Amina secretly started dating a boy named Joseph, but not long after, her father found a love letter that she had wrote to him. Yasser was very upset and began beating Amina until she confessed who this boy was, but she never told him. Within days, Yasser moved the entire family from Bedford to Louisville, Texas. Amina and Sarah were convinced that it was only a matter of time until their father took their lives, so on Christmas Day, they ran away with their mother and cut all contact with their father. But this didn't stop Yasser from trying to track his family and manipulate their mother to returning home. And when Yasser eventually got a hold of Patricia, he convinced her to return home with Amina and Sarah. The girls were terrified and resisted, but eventually gave in when their mother pressured them and reassured them that everything would be okay. But unfortunately, this was not the case at all. On New Year's Day in 2008, Amina and Sarah met with their father to go out for dinner and supposedly hash things out, but Yasser shot them to death in his taxi cab and fled the scene. There's actually a recording of Sarah in her final moments when she called police, and you can hear her frantically screaming and telling police that her father had just shot her. Yasser went into hiding for more than 12 years and was placed on the FBI's most wanted list. But in August 2020, he was finally found and arrested in a home in Justin, Texas. And you know what's crazy? His son and his brother actually helped him hide out all these years. Yasser denied taking his daughters' lives, but the prosecution described the motive as honor killings, which happens when a woman in the family brings dishonor to the entire family. Yasser was sentenced to life in prison, and his son and brother were sentenced to more than 10 years in prison.
2 moms chatting at a water park were able to solve a 30-year-old cold case. On Thanksgiving weekend 1989, a teenager named Mandy Stavik went on a jog with her German Shepherd in Acme, Washington. The dog came back, but she didn't. And sadly, her body was found 3 days later on the bank of a nearby river. Because she was in the water, a lot of the evidence had been washed off, but police were able to pull male DNA from her. At the time, there were no matches in the system, and Mandy's murder would go unsolved for 3 decades. Heather Backstrom and Marilee Anderson were among a group of moms who had begun gossiping while their kids played together at the water park. One of the moms brought up an unsolved murder in their hometown of Acme. This is when Heather blurted out that she thinks she knew who did it, and Marilee said she did too. It turns out that both of them had independent, creepy experiences with the same man, Tim Bass. One day, Tim Bass knocked on Marilee's door and asked to use the phone. This was before the time of cell phones, so it wasn't completely unusual. But Marilee's phone volume was up loud enough to know that he wasn't actually having a conversation on the phone. And when he hung up, he started telling merrily about how he was secretly in love with her and how he would drive past her house every day and watch her in the yard. She threatened to call the police, and thankfully Tim left without incident. Meanwhile, Heather caught a ride from her friend one day who happened to also be friends with Tim. Since there was no back seat in his truck, she sat in the middle console with the friend driving and then Tim Bass sitting in the passenger seat. Tim Bass was aggressively flirting with her, and she found this really creepy since she was just 15 and he was 21. The two women went to the police with the suspicion that Tim Bass was the one who killed Mandy. The police then went to his manager at the local bakery, who was more than happy to help them collect a DNA sample. She grabbed his used Coke can out of the trash, and the police tested the DNA taken from the lip of the can against the DNA that was found on Mandy's body. And it was a match. It made no sense that Tim Bass's DNA would be on Mandy unless he was the one who killed her. At his trial, Tim Bass, who was now 51, was sentenced to 27 years in prison. Even when a case goes unsolved for decades, there's still hope. Comment any other cases you want me to cover down below.
Kanika immediately called her mother, telling her about the other mystery man. By this point, her mother Judy states that Kanika felt targeted and was convinced that this wasn't a random attempt to scam her. She then told her mother she was taking the day off work to run errands during the daytime so she wasn't out after dark and could get back home safe. But this would unfortunately be the last time Judy would ever speak to her daughter. After speaking with her mother, Kanika left her apartment to run her errands, arriving back at around 11:50 a.m. But waiting in her apartment was an unknown assailant who opened fire with a handgun, shooting Kanika multiple times. Police were called when neighbors heard gunshots and a woman screaming. When police arrived, they found Kanika in critical condition with her keys and wallet next to her body, ruling out a robbery. Sadly, Kanika died from her injuries the next day, August 29, 2008. Her murder baffled law enforcement as they found no motive. Kanika had no prior criminal history, no boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, no known enemies, and her case turned up no leads. A spokesman for the lab Kanika worked at told reporters, quote, "It's premature to speculate on whether her death has any connection to her work," and then refused to specify her job title or the lab she worked in. Under all these odd circumstances, you can now understand why it's strange her case has received little to no media coverage. Kanika was smart, beautiful, full of life, and working for the military, so why wasn't anyone other than her family desperately searching for answers? Many have suggested and agreed that this was a contracted hit due to the fact that each time a man showed up at her door, they addressed her by her full name and refused to identify themselves. Over the years, no new information has been released about Kanika's murder. There is a $25,000 cash reward for information leading to the arrest of those responsible for her death. If you have any information, please contact the Prince George's County Crime Solvers at 1-866-411-8477. One of the most disheartening things about researching true crime is when I come upon a case that has little to no media coverage. When you Google Kanika Powell, all of the search results are from true crime podcasts or content creators, people like you and me who are just trying to keep her case in the spotlight. Not local or national media, not police, and it's upsetting, and after hearing her case, you'll understand why. Kanika Powell was born on January 31st, 1980 in Maryland. After graduating high school in 1998, Kanika joined the U.S. Army, where she spent several years in Korea. Kanika was described as ambitious, bright, and determined, which led her to a job as a security contractor at Johns Hopkins University Laboratory back in Maryland after her time in the Army. By 2006, Kanika was hired on full-time and was living alone in a garden-style apartment in Laurel, Maryland. Kanika obtained top-secret security clearance from her time in the Army, which made her the perfect candidate for the highly confidential job at Johns Hopkins. According to her mother, Kanika would often travel as far as California or Florida for work, but was never able to tell her exactly what she was doing. Due to the sensitive nature of her job and national security, little to no information about her time working at the lab has been released. On Saturday, August 22, 2008, 28-year-old Kanika heard a knock at her door. When she looked through the peephole of her door, she saw a man that she didn't recognize. Upon asking this man who he was, all he stated was that he was from the FBI and he was looking for Kanika Powell. The man held up a badge but no picture ID and never gave his name. Kanika later stated that the badge looked fake. The man told Kanika he was looking for her in regards to an investigation, to which she replied she had no idea as to what he was talking about and he would have to show some type of documentation as well as a warrant. The man simply left, and as Kanika watched him walk away from her bedroom window, she heard his second voice tell him to walk in the opposite direction. After this situation, she called the FBI, who told Kanika that it was likely bogus, because the FBI would never come alone and would always leave a card so you could contact them. She also called police, who arrived 4 minutes after her call, but were unable to locate the mystery man. Kanika detailed all of this information in the form of an email that she forwarded to a group of friends and family, ending the email with, "Pass this on, ladies. This is not a fake forward. This happened to me, Kanika." She was extremely shaken by the whole situation and was in the process of getting an alarm system for her apartment. But 5 days later, on August 22nd at 7:30 in the morning, Kanika had another knock at her door. This time, a different man claiming to have a package for Kanika Powell was standing outside her apartment, and again she refused to open the door. The man said he had to go get the package, but then disappeared without leaving anything or a note indicating where it could be picked up at. I'll have part 2 linked at the top of the comments.
Let's talk about the disappearance of 2-year-old Tika Lewis from this bowling alley. Tika was born on July 4th, 1996 to parents Teresa and Robert. She's described as having a shy and quiet personality, but was definitely a mama's girl. She loved being with her mom and would cry if anyone else tried to pick her up. She loved to have cereal in the morning and then go over to the TV and put on the Winnie the Pooh show. Tika was a shy little girl, but she was also very joyful. She smiled a lot and was just an overall happy toddler. On January 23, 1999, over a dozen members of Tika's family headed over to the New Frontiers bowling lane in Tacoma, Washington. The bowling alley was extremely busy this night because it was league night, so there were over 300 people there. Tika's family was placed in the center and took up the lanes 7 and 8. As the family was bowling, Tika was particularly interested in the arcade. According to reports, lanes 7 and 8 were near the arcade, so Tika's family was able to keep a close eye on her. But of course the family didn't leave her by herself, and Teresa would follow her daughter around the arcade as she played the games. At around 10:30, Tika sat down to play a driving game. Her mother Teresa was with her, and she quickly glanced over to the bowling lane to see how her brother's turn was going. She said she looked away for around 10 to 15 seconds, and when she turned back, Tika was gone. She began looking all over the arcade and was checking in the spaces between the wall and the games just in case Tika was playing hide and seek. Teresa searched all over the bowling lane and eventually approached an off-duty police officer who was working security that night. The bowling alley made an announcement about Tika's disappearance and asked people to be on the lookout. Then the Tacoma Police Department was called to the scene. The police got there pretty quickly and they began searching the area. At first they thought that maybe Tika had wandered off on her own, so they blocked off the parking lot and checked every car that was trying to leave. They checked everyone's trunks, they checked inside the car, but Tika was nowhere to be found. Police interviewed all 300 people at the bowling alley, and one person came forward with information. This witness says that a maroon Pontiac Grand Am sped out of the parking lot around the time Tika went missing. This was a 4-door late 1980s or early 1990s model with dark tinted windows and a large spoiler. Police haven't been able to track down the driver and aren't sure if this is related in any way to Tika's disappearance. However, if this person had nothing to do with it, I feel like by now they would have come forward and told police that they were the driver. So I definitely think it's weird. Of course, police did investigate Tika's family, and they were all cleared. 3 days after Tika disappeared on January 26, 2 search dogs led police to some bushes across the street from the bowling alley. There, police found a pile of men's clothing that are described as a navy blue wool peacoat with IS or JS written on the back label, off-white Lee brand jeans, and a Columbia brand button-down plaid shirt. Again, police aren't sure if these items are related to Tika's disappearance or if it's just a coincidence. Okay, go to part 2. This is part 2 on what happened to 2-year-old Tika Lewis and how she disappeared from this bowling alley. Now, the news was heavily covering Tika's disappearance, and this led to a handful of people sharing their experiences at this bowling alley. 2 months before Tika disappeared, a man had attended league night at this bowling alley with his 4-year-old son. His son had gone to the bathroom, and a few minutes later, a person walked in and saw his son lying on the ground. His son had been essayed. The father reported this incident to the security guards at the bowling alley, but this was never officially reported to police. Then, just weeks before Tika's disappearance, a family had gone to this bowling alley with their 6-year-old son. Their son had been playing in the arcade, and when the mother went to go check on him, she saw that a man was bending down near him, holding his hand and talking to him. As she approached this man and her child, she heard the man tell her son that he was his father.
The mother reported this man to the security guards who escorted him out of the building. But again, this was never officially reported to police. Another incident occurred the day Tika went missing, but this didn't happen at the bowling alley. This happened at a park only a mile away. The father was at this park with his children when a man tried to abduct one of his kids. The man chased the father away, and he saw the man get into a blue Pontiac Grand Am. Now, in the moment this man did not report this incident to police, it wasn't until he saw the news about Tika's disappearance that he decided to finally report the incident. He realized that the man that tried to abduct his child at the park could be the same man that abducted Tika. But unfortunately, this man from the park has never been identified. There really wasn't much movement in Tika's case until 2020. This is when a witness, who the news is calling John, spoke with Q13 News about what he saw when Tika disappeared. He was 17 years old at the time, and he says he was with his family that night at the bowling alley. He had gone to the restroom, and as he was heading over there, he was rudely bumped into by a man. This guy was white and was holding hands with a little girl. John assumed that he was the girl's father and was just trying to rush his daughter to the bathroom. However, he says this moment stuck with him because the guy was just so rude, like he bumped into him and he didn't even apologize to John or anything. When John saw the news about Tika's disappearance, that's when he made the connection. He realized that the man that had bumped into him in the bathroom was holding hands with Tika. So he reported this to police, but they never really investigated it. They never questioned him about this incident or tried to get more info from him. So in 2020, when a new detective was assigned to the case named Steven, he read John's statement and knew that this was important information. So he reached out to John and asked him if he remembered what this man's face looked like, and John says he remembers it perfectly. John says this man was white, about 5'11", with a husky build. He had shoulder-length brown curly hair, a thick mustache, and a heavily pockmarked face. He was wearing a blue plaid shirt and faded jeans. This isn't the first time a pockmarked face has come into the investigation. America's Most Wanted had gone to the bowling lane to do a reenactment of Tika's disappearance. At the reenactment, this woman had seen a man with a pockmarked face standing nearby watching the reenactment. They thought that the man was suspicious, so they reported him to the police. They say killers often like to go back to the crime scene. So what are the odds that this woman saw a man with a pockmarked face watching the reenactment, and then John back in 1999 saw a man with a pockmarked face holding Tika's hand? To this day, in 2022, Tika Lewis has still not been found. Police are still investigating the case and are asking for the public's help in identifying the man with the pockmarked face and identifying the owner of the 90s or 80s Pontiac Grand Am that was seen peeling out of the parking lot. If you know anything about Tika's whereabouts or anything that could help her case, please contact the Tacoma, Washington Police Department. My thoughts and prayers go out to Tika's family, and I truly hope she is found soon.